Deputy Speaker. Absolute pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Wantage, who I genuinely believe could speak for an entire day on this subject and still enthrall the entire chamber. I completely love this focus on lifelong learning, short courses, long courses, life-enhancing learning. It's hugely important not only to the individual but also to the country, and I'm pleased that we finally have a government that is committed to all forms of learning, jobs and sectors. I give credit to the Department for Education and all the officials in the dock as well, because I know how hard that they have been working. I mean, I didn't go to university myself. I left home at 15, didn't do particularly well at school, went and got a job as a legal secretary, and then I worked my way up, went to night school, carried on and qualified as a solicitor. But I have to say I was quite embarrassed about all of that. I didn't tell anybody. I remember going out with barristers and them saying, well, just give this up. It's hard work. You're going to work all day, you're studying at night, you're teaching aerobics as well in the evening to pay for all the law school fees. That looks like hard graft. Why don't you just go to uni? And I used to fumble and stumble on my explanation as to why I was learning the way I am. But that was because the entire country and the Labour Party for a long period of time had focused very much on getting 50% of youngsters into university and not a lot of chat about the rest of us. So we know that a lot of parents are often very, very supportive of further education colleges, but they're still very supportive for other people's children, because at the moment it is still considered with many families, many schools and in many quarters that university is the only way forward. So fast forward to being a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed candidate in Stroud. I got chatting to the Further Education College, SGS, absolutely amazing college. I spoke to all our secondary schools and I met bright and ambitious young people. And on the doorsteps, I kept meeting people that had qualified through further education colleges. And I was learning all the time about these great careers, often sort of running great big departments or really kind of leading the way in their individual industries, but they tended to not talk about how they qualified, often because they've been written off by the time they'd got into colleges. So we don't drop that part of our life. So I started bothering education ministers about further education and skills, and I started a campaign called Further Education Friday, and I basically banged on about further education every single Friday on all of my social media. And what I learned from all of that is just how valuable everything that goes on in our colleges is, and our lifelong learning programs, and how important they are. And I just want to remind everybody also that during the pandemic, the professions that people were missed the most it was the chefs, it was the hairdressers, it was the childminders, it was the beauty, it was the construction. Remember when we weren't allowed plumbers in our houses and how much trouble that was causing. So I absolutely welcome this bill and focus on lifelong learning and finding a way to support that financially. Similar to other members, I do have questions to the Minister that I know he will deal with, just about the funding behind this for our colleges and how much that will help them at the moment. They've got a real crisis in recruitment. They're seeing other colleges and other sectors providing things like golden hellos, providing cash that FE colleges just can't do to recruit and retain staff. Similar to the Honourable Member for Waveney, I'm interested to see how this works alongside the apprenticeship levy, which again we could have another very long debate on, making sure that we're seeing reforms. And I do also want to, not necessarily today, hear a little bit more about the polling and the work the department has done to look into the perception of taking on more debt. Because the reality to lots of people in my communities, and it certainly was an issue for me when I was growing up, I don't want to get into debt. That's why I worked to learn, and it's why I made sure I was teaching those aerobics classes to pay my fees. So
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way. Does she agree with me that some of the contributions about debt, particularly I regret to say from members opposite, have been very unhelpful. And actually I found that the best advice on that has often come from Martin Lewis, who is very widely trusted on these things, that going to university or taking on any course, as you could under this bill, should not be seen as a debt in the traditional sense of the terms. It does operate for UK-based people much more like a graduate tax rather than actual debt. And that framing is far more important because that will encourage people into learning rather than discourage them.
I thank the Honourable Member for Newcastle-under-Lyme. He's absolutely right. And when you look into the way these things work, it isn't a debt, it is very much an enabler. But we know that many, many people do feel that. So I do want to understand how the department has looked at this and how we sort of deal with those concerns going forward. Two separate points. So green skills and then employability in the final minutes that I have. An article I wrote some time ago set out and argued that net zero cannot happen without know-how, but we've effectively got a green skills emergency. There is a challenge to reskill those who work in existing industries that are going to be affected by the transition. Fossil fuel production, for example, in the North Sea, created very skilled and well-paid workers who are sorely needed to make the transition successful, but they need to have a skills bridge to make sure that they're retraining them for future industries. So I'm interested to know how the lifelong learning entitlement could help that. The second issue with the skills emergency, in my view, is educating our young people. We've got a huge skills gap for our future workforce, which needs urgently closing. I did some work with the Honourable Chair of the Select Committee, creating a nature GCSE and really engaging people. I mean, my main message to young people when I go into schools is do not lie down on motorways or glue yourself to stuff. Do your STEM subjects and make sure you're learning really well, because if you become scientists, you will be fixing the environmental challenges that we have today, and you will be the saviours of our future. I encourage people to look at the Onward report, Green Jobs, Red Wall. I work with the Onward think tank very closely, and they're absolutely excellent. I'm going to run out of time to go through that, but alongside the lifelong learning bill that we're looking at today, it's really important the Department for Education works with other government departments to ensure that the landscape is set up. So we're going to educate, we're going to encourage people to do skills, and we're going to encourage people to take on more courses, but unless we get the factories up and motoring, unless we get the seed investment into some areas of tech, the jobs will not be there. So please work with the other government departments. On employability, I have started an APPG, all-party parliamentary group on the future of employability. This has been in direct response to the calls of employers in Stroud, and I know that this is around the country, of recruitment issues. The calls from potential employees, post-pandemic, they're feeling burned out, there are high numbers of issues with mental health, millions of people now are on welfare, and I've also been fighting the good fight on childcare. So we've got a huge group of economically inactive, mainly mothers who are not working at full tilt. So I've been looking at this, and I spoke to a good friend of mine who started an employment company called Finito, and it's his job to get people work ready. It's a gentleman called Ronell Lehman. So we put our heads together and we've started, we've got sort of this employability APPG because I passionately believe in the power of work doing good, and I can see that thousands of people are no longer work ready, many millions of people not working at full tilt, but also people don't feel that they've got a place in the workforce. They're not work ready and they don't feel that they're able to engage. So I know that work is the fastest route out of poverty. That's what all of the evidence tells us. It also helps with getting a reason to get out of bed, good for mental health, good for relationships, and really good for our children to see routine and a sense of purpose in our parents. And we don't always have to like our jobs. I tell you, there are days, even in this great privilege to be here, we don't like our jobs, but we have to have a really strong message to the country that work is good for you. Work will help not only you, your family, but also the country, as I said earlier. So this focus on lifelong earning, focus on employability, making sure that we are getting people work ready into a job once they're in a job, to be able to transition into a more responsible part of that job or into a new job is the quickest way to feeling sustained and fulfilled. So I look forward to working with the Minister. I believe passionately in what he's trying to do, and also the Secretary of State that I note now in her seat. I'm genuinely ambitious for every single person that I meet, and I think the front bench of the Department for Education are exactly the same. So I wish Godspeed with this bill, and I look forward to making sure it happens.